Welcome back to Side Quests, episode 12. If you're wondering why I always hesitate a little bit at the beginning, sort of smile, it's because the recording tells us that it's recording, and I wait for it to stop as if I'm being gentlemanly to it. But back with us is an actual person, Wes Schantz, my constant companion and perennial party member. Wes, it's good to see you now on New Year's Day, post
Yeah.
Christmas. Merry Christmas, Happy Kwanzaa. Hanukkah was a little bit earlier this year. Happy Hanukkah.
Oh,
But Happy New Year. Feliz
thank you.
Año Nuevo.
I don't know if you celebrate this one. What about the solstice? That's a fun one. Happy
Oh, well, I mean,
solstice. That
yeah.
was like a week or two ago now, but yeah, it's great. I love the fresh blanket of snow that's forming where I am. It's like the year spread out in front like a sheet of paper that we're just starting to write on, and um, it's been a little bit of time since we talked about this game specifically, but actually we did talk, not long ago about your paper and all that. And yeah, it's just there's something psychologically um, tectonic, right, about the change from one year to the next, and so it's like starting fresh, starting a new disc, as it were.
Yes, instead of starting a new game, we are starting a new disc and perhaps gaining a new perspective
Mhm.
as and hopefully a more enlightened one and less obscure one um, as these days become longer as we move towards spring and Easter, if we're looking between liturgical Christian days as just a basis
For sure.
for doing things. We can look at other days later. But that's something interesting about this part of the game is that we did get prayers. We did get mention of something like a religion here. So we've already seen a religious dance in order to actually have a magical
Mhm.
effect in the world to produce this impenetrable sand tornado that the Clarins could do.
Mhm.
Um, but now we see that the summoners have their own daily prayers to the
Yes.
Eidolon wall. Something like an idol, but not quite idol because this is clearly a representation of something which is real in their world and
Yes.
to which they have a connection represented by their horn. Something I'll tell to the more classically minded listeners is that in the Latin translation of what happens to Moses in the Vulgate, Jerome, the word cornu and
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
means uh, it means horn. And so there could have been a mix up between the word horn and like something more like corona, like crown. And so this could be, I don't know if it's a localization issue or a reference to Moses or even just a harking back to an earlier game, but that still begs the question of where that initial imagery comes from.
Mhm.
Of having a horn and thus having an ability to commune with a somewhat intangible but also divinely tangible and powerful sort of force
Yeah.
in the world. And so there is sort of a mosaic connection there. Just to go deep from the get-go, Wes, let's
Okay.
go. New year. And yeah, so but Dagger, who's lost her name Garnett, who's lost
Mhm.
her original name, which we will learn eventually, does not have her. No, not only does she not have her Eidolons now due to her adoptive mother, who she's now lost in two different ways, because she sort of lost her mother when she acted against her and stole her Eidolons, but then she also lost her when she gets blown up by Bahamut after Kuja takes control of it with that giant eye that we had recently seen in Madain Sari
Yeah.
when Garnet remembers her origins and her biological mother. And so I guess we get the doubling theme that we mentioned last
Mhm.
time, again mentioned with the two mothers of Garnet, but used for a double tragedy. And
Yeah.
I wonder if that falls in line with not only the doubling theme that we've mentioned, but the self-consciousness of the repetition and sort of uh,
Yeah.
temporary nature of the art. It itself sort of duplicates itself, but unlike a clone, it differentiates itself and does aspire towards art, and so there's perhaps a dual function in the same way that, or in a way that may be similar to the way that Garnet has two mothers and loses two mothers, thus doubling the tragedy. But she does gain a new home as well. She's welcomed home by
Yeah.
Aiko, and they both seem to gain by that. Aiko's no longer alone, no longer the only summoner, and gets to welcome someone home, and gets to be welcomed home. And in fact, now she has a double home. She returns at the beginning of Disc 3 to Alexandria to rule, where again her identity will change, where she will
Mhm.
go from princess to queen. Sorry, that was a lot.
That's good. That's good because it's been a little while since I actually played this portion of the game. And I'm kind of piecing together, between what I actually played and then what we last talked about when we actually talked about the game. And then, yeah, the theme there of the repetition, the multiplication, the doubling as like the kind of main instance of that. Uh, and then the horns, like you mentioned, as an instance of mistranslation or kind of misapprehension, slippage in translation, I think is all really interesting and really comes to the fore in this portion of the game. Because in a way, this is another one of those resets of the story, right? Like we're coming to the end of a disc and the beginning of another disc, and that's always a point at which there's a kind of hinge, a pivot, and often a kind of restart to everything that has been going on. I think it's also worth mentioning that we get our final party member at this
Yeah,
point, kind of out of nowhere.
the
Um,
flaming amaranth.
the flaming. He's pretty cool. He jumps around a lot. He's got this awesome hairdo, and yeah, he intervenes in a plot kind of way, in an important way, to disrupt what might have been a kind of doubling, right? A kind of like kidnapping in progress, which is actually more of a collateral for a trade-off that the other assassin wants to uh, accomplish. So they were both given the same mission by the queen, and it seems like she, the female assassin, is way more uh, merciless in her pursuit of that goal, for whatever reason. She, like I think I mentioned, kind of looks more like she'd be a playable character, like she's the right sort of size and proportion. And it would seem like that would be a natural arc to a character to like go from, bad guy to good guy, whatever. But it's a kind of a switcheroo because it's the other guy, who's kind of the strong silent one who doesn't, you know, he doesn't do anything up until this point. He's been out of the picture since we first saw him. But he jumps in and basically says something like the um, the the use of a human, shield that she's doing there, with Aiko, is not tolerable, by his sort of code of honor
Right.
as a as an assassin. Um, and so he, is a kind of um, stand-in perhaps for Zidane, perhaps for Steiner, right? This sort of person who has a code that he lives by, which is a little bit obscure to the people around him and even a little bit ridiculous, frankly, right? Because when Zidane, of course, defeats him in this one-on-one battle that ensues, um, he expects to be killed, right? He doesn't think that his life has any value now that he's been bested in a fair fight, right? Which is his sort of summum bonum or something like that, right? And because Zidane spares him, he is sort of at loose ends, and that seems to be the thing that triggers his desire to join the party, right? Is like he's in a sense in debt. His life is in Zidane's hands, but in a deeper way, he's like, I really want to understand the source of this person's power, and so that starts to sound even more like Freya and Fratly and Beatrix to an extent, right? Like that whole thread of character development. And so I don't know. He's like you know keep saying this game, a lot of elements of this game are sort of forgettable, I think, or at least my experience has been that I don't remember them very well. And Amaranth in particular, uh, I don't remember really anything about his subsequent interventions in the plot or what he's up to. But I mean, it's interesting. It's always interesting to get another party member, having another person to sort of bounce off of, these different themes that we've been working with. But I agree, the more sort of in your face pairing here is definitely Garnet, Aiko, and the way in which Aiko, she has to choose whether she's going to stay in the village or leave. And so in that way, she's kind of paired with Vivi, right? Actually, she is kind of even they have a pretty interesting little dialogue there where he's like telling her, you know, what she just said to him in terms of the game was to be true to himself, right? Not to lie to himself about what he truly should do in the moment when he has the choice to destroy the soul cage monster. Um, and he basically says that back to her, like that she can't essentially she can't pass up this opportunity to not be alone, right? That's the thing she desires most. And so she, sure enough, joins the party, right? So she officially joins the party, uh, and then Amaranth, in short order, also sort of tentatively joins the party, but it's unclear whether he'll stick around. So yeah, that's the other. Yeah, but I agree. No, the horns, the eyeball in the sky, those are definitely the dominant images here for sure.
And of course, we have our first person remembering that they forgot their childhood, like Final Fantasy VIII, and a bit like we learned in Final Fantasy VII about
Mm.
Cloud. We have our first amnesiac realizing that she was amnesiac and then having memories, and
Oh,
they were
yes.
apparently very traumatic memories. In fact, this work makes me very much want to apply both the Freudian and a Jungian analysis to what she remembers and what she seemed to have repressed. But yeah, I
Okay.
wanted to pick up on Amarant too. He gets a lot of flack from people as being sort of a Steiner clone
Yeah. Yeah.
that is just not as honorable and not as easily understood in his code of ethics. So I guess they're going for like a shadow,
Hmm.
was so cool, and apparently, and perhaps the father of Gao. Sorry, spoiler post facto alert. Um, but also like they color theme him along the lines of Vincent, and he's sort of like Vincent in that he can be the last character that you get, not optional. Um, but right, he, like Steiner, has this sort of wooden conception of how the world should work in terms of Steiner, in terms of responsibility and responsibility of the queen and not needing to make choices, sort of like Squall likes not to make choices and to give in to some authority or the situation as authority. Or and but Amarant, it's more like this retributive justice, like very like well, he says he's there to ensure fairness.
Hmm.
And so he believes in this sort of live by the sword, die by the sword, very stark, win or lose, you lose everything ideology. And I wanted to contrast that potentially with Aiko, who we get here, who is, of course, a child. Amarant is 26. She is, I think, 9. And
6, I think.
6, excuse
Yeah,
me. And yeah, so no,
tiny.
Debbie is 9, of course. And
Yeah.
so yeah, she's quite young, and she wants Zidane to dance with her someday. He doesn't answer. Um, uh, but Aiko is sort of bound by the past. She, like Dagger, very different from Vivi, for example, in that Vivi only has so little time, and yet Aiko is trying to preserve her ancestral home,
Mhm.
going to maintaining the ancestral religion, while also heeding the advice of her ancestor, her direct ancestor, her grandfather.
Mhm.
And that almost keeps her from going into the world. And I think if I were to look at this from like a Jungian analysis sort of way, she makes the right choice. Rather than regressing and staying in this past world that's just ruined and already past, she meets a real one of her, another summoner, and somebody that she likes Zidane, and she makes her own decision. And she sort of,
Mhm.
you can see her her personality develop as she takes agency and makes decisions that are already enriching her life. Her only
Yeah.
She has real humans now. It's an anti-Peter Pan. She has real humans to interact with, and another summoner, and a black mage, and a coup when he's around. Um, Instead of just these like sort of mobs who are stand-ins for like sort of extra imaginary angelic fairy-like care
Yeah.
figures. Um, and so she does not go back to the Lost Boys. She comes back to the world. Um, and so it's interesting because we focused a lot on Vivi's revelations, Zidane's future revelations. We get to see a lot of Dagger Garnett dealing with her worldview and her world changing in real time. Like when she sees Alexandria attack Lindblom, for example, and her mother at the helm, and then now she sees her mother get blown away, and she's really divided about that.
Mhm.
But apparently, just also very sad. And so we've and of course we've seen a lot of Steiner, and then we just have Amarant thrown in so late to the game. Trying to understand, he's not even consistent on Zidane either, right? When Zidane can't like climb the trunk really fast, he's like, is he really even strong? But then when he hears about the Eidolons and sees that, he's like, oh wow, Bahamut is really scary. I've got to keep my eye on that. And so he's sort of inconsistent in his analysis as well. So I find him less interesting than Shadow, less interesting than Sid. He would need a much more developed backstory. He has basically no backstory at this
Mhm.
point, but um, even though Shadow starts with no backstory, people are scared of him. We don't see that with Amaranth, just like one person kind of. And later it turns out that he actually has a really interesting story, and you as a player get to make a really interesting choice regarding him too.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
To
so
save her.
yeah, and both of those characters therefore are also optional, which adds so and maybe that's what I'm my analysis is getting to here. Since he's not optional, that makes his sort of wooden presentation have to stand scrutiny against these other far more developed characters that have had two discs to develop so far. And he jumps in and he's no Kate Sith, you know. He doesn't have so much personality. He has no personality, basically. And right, so okay, I basically would say I agree with people who are on the internet and talk about
Right.
Amaranth. Um, but for the for one of my major reasons being that his development is not nearly as profound, even as a character who's introduced almost right alongside him, Aiko.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. I mean, they do seem like they sort of form a pair as they come on board relatively late here. And yet I mean, it's hard for me at least to see much um, of a dynamic between them. Of course, I mean, he does in a
no,
way save her, right? But she seems completely uninterested in him, right? When Zidane saved her, even just a little bit, she was all about him, but seems totally incurious about Amaranth. And I mean, it would make sense, I think, if others in the party were at least a little bit suspicious of Amaranth or in some way reacted to him, but there's basically nothing like that. Um, Quina is also like out of the picture at this point. We last saw she was hanging out with the Mughals, fishing and cooking
oh
and doing
yeah,
all that.
yeah.
Uh,
Teaching us
but
about cooking
but
for an extra person.
this is like I mean a character who has come and gone once already, and so again is a little bit harder to rely on, like hard to fully trust in a way. Um, so on the plus side, what this does is to really concentrate the player's attention on the characters that we do have. As you mentioned, Steiner, Freya, they've been out of the picture for so long now. We're probably wondering what's up with them, but we get no information about that as of now.
Right.
Um, We do get to form a party, which is unusual, maybe even unique up to this point in the game. I'm not sure. Yeah, to actually choose the four of five who are available. And what I've seen with that is that you can sort of double up on healers, which was kind of required for a while there. You had both Dagger and Ico, who are primarily support and healing. Um, and so you finally have the option of letting one of them stay behind. Um, but it sort of feels wrong to do so because both of them have just had this like sort of major, story moment, like Dagger learning about her repressed memories and the fact that she, like Aiko, left this village at the age of 6, right? Under very different circumstances. Uh, so what she says is like some sort of hurricane hit the village, and
And there were
we,
three tornadoes in her vision, but
yeah,
caused by that giant eye. Like that
yeah,
gets the causality a little bit wrong. It
and
wasn't some hurricane, some natural phenomenon.
at least yeah, the vision that she had at the very start of the game was from that as well, but we only sort of saw her seeing herself, which is
Yes.
odd, like on the raft, and this other figure who turns out to have been her biological mother. Um, and she sort of realizes, well, at least one person knows about this, and that's Tot, right? Dr. Tot is the one
Yes.
who found them, and so she'll ask him when she gets a chance. Um, but in the course of that, the village is on fire. There's sort of this, piecing together that she and Aiko do about like, well, something terrible happened, probably related to that summoning that went wrong, where they had to seal the monster away in the Iifa tree. And I think that it turns out that that's Leviathan, because when we go there later, well, pretty soon, to fight Kuja, or try to, um, that's the monster that is kind of locked in the roots of the tree, and they release it. But but you mentioned before we started this line from Ibsen, and I thought you were talking about the play that happens in the new theater in Alexandria, but it's actually when Zidane and Garnet are talking here, right? Because I'm looking at the screenshots now.
Down on the little ship that helps jog
Yeah.
her memory, and that's a well, that's a very powerful theme of two, not just Little Mermaid, but like
You
Psycho,
have to kiss the
um,
girl.
you know, Charon and
Uh-huh.
Odyssey, Aeneid, Inferno, and and even Purgatorio, these other uh famous mythological rivers, Lethe,
Hmm.
and Unoe. And so on this river, in this place of, transition, sort of medial or limbic,
Hmm.
liminal, I guess is what I'm looking for here. Liminal space. Uh, they're in motion but also steady, and it jogs our memory. Like how a vibrating toothbrush is supposed to jog your plaque off your teeth. And maybe psychically the same sort of thing going on. We should get on the water more.
Well,
Um,
it's that, and it's the song because they
the
hear Aiko
song,
singing a
yes,
song
it's
that
the
she
same
also
song
knows.
that had lured Zidane down there too. So
Yeah.
the sonic resonances, which are themselves a callback to our own experiences with these games and how
Hmm.
they jog our memories, and how Kuja's theme, for example, uh, is both grandiloquent, but then also there's a bit of the Shinra theme that
Hmm.
immediately picks up with the marching, sort of beat.
Yes.
Though I really like the organ at the beginning, but right. Um, so I also just wanted to mention, since you brought up Leviathan, that we get a really strong, interesting biblical mix at the Iifa tree here. This
Hmm.
giant tree. So tree of Hesperides, maybe if we're looking like sort of pagan, Greco-Roman, but like maybe tree of life, or tree of good and evil, maybe like tree of life because it's like this strange like soul tree.
Yes.
Um, uh, or it could be like the world tree, like Yggdrasil. Um, but with Leviathan at the bottom of it, which is also an Old Testament Sumerian as well image, but primarily, a Book of Job,
Hmm.
Leviathan on a hook. Um, uh, and so Really interesting mythological symbolism coming there. Leviathan is very powerful and brings the flood, so almost like a Noah image there. Too powerful to save Braun, even. And
Yes.
that's interesting too, that another Eidolon that more power in this instance cannot save Braun. It would just help to destroy her.
Yes. Yes.
And when she dies, she mentions being overcome with greed and feeling actually happy, like when her husband was still alive, which ostensibly gives us some reason to empathize with her a little bit, that she, like somebody might turn to cigarettes or to food in a time of tragedy. She turned to power mongering because of the loss of her husband, but of course she had a kingdom to deal with and a daughter that she had a responsibility to that she forgot. But oh yes, and I should mention, since we talked about the theme of looks and what they represent in this fairy tale like work where they make very intentional decisions, we have both Kuja and Bron comment on each other's looks.
Yeah.
Kuja twice calls her the elephant lady, and she calls him, I think, that feminine one, something like that. That feminine looking Kuja, right before they go to war with each other. And she eventually summons Bahamut, who then the giant eye that was in Garnet's um vision and repressed memories turns into Kuja's. And then
She calls him his, his girly face. You
his
finally
girly
decided to show
face.
your
Yeah,
girly face. Yeah,
his
yeah, yeah, yeah.
girly face.
Yeah, and he has this kind of yeah, ability to steal the summon from her once she releases it. Yeah, for whatever reason. Yeah.
Right. So there again, you see like a shift in sort of identity and power. So I would like to hear what you have to say on that more power would just destroy her. Like what is going on with Leviathan and this Iifa tree? Um, but B, what is well, let's just start with that.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah, there's so the imagery is interesting, right? You have Kuja on the flying silver dragon,
Silver Dragon.
and it doesn't even get a name. He just calls it Silver Dragon. He's
Where
like
in
monologuing to it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
there's another identity and like he just has generic Silver Dragon.
right. He also, yeah, he has some names that he throws out as well. Like he decides that this is the moment when he's going to cast aside his mask,
Hmm.
right, to reveal his true self. He says that the tree, its beauty becomes the great mother tree that lives among the stars. So that's interesting. Um, but just kind of a thing that he says to no one in particular. And then you know, again, he doesn't even deign to face our party. He's like out of reach. He's, literally and figuratively beyond them, and just sort of sends these monsters made out of mist, I guess, like the leftovers of it, essentially to delay you. And he says this is the end of the ugly desire. That's what he calls this first act. He says. Um, so I take it that he's referring to Bronn there
Yes.
and the way in which he's manipulated her through the power of mist, right, to acquire and then use certain of these summon spells, which had belonged to her adopted daughter. Um, so yeah, so there's that dragon. There's all this like nomenclature he's throwing around, and then there's the Leviathan that they are trying to summon. It proves to be too little, too late. Really, like what we had thought was going to be this big showdown with Kuja, uh, him in the sky, us on the land, is actually we're sort of an afterthought for him at this point. He's thinking of it as a battle between him and Bronn, and a sort of like harvest time more so than a battle, really, because he's just reaping what he's sowed all along. Um, so, Leviathan, although mythologically speaking, seems like it should be important, it's kind of a red herring here, and it doesn't get a chance to do anything at this stage, at least, because she goes ahead and summons Bahamut, along with all of the other black mages that are still surviving at that point on her side. There's this kind of cutscene that happens where he Kuja, that is, accepts the attack, the flare attack from Bahamut, um, has a very small like wound on his head, which he seems amused by, right? And and then he does this thing, which we saw in her flashback, that is Garnet's flashback. Um, he says, "The final act will take us away from Gaia, and I will kill my nemesis with my own hand." And then we get the cutscene with the eye opening up that we saw in the destruction of the summoners before. So either he was responsible for that or was in some way using the same thing that was responsible for that event. Um, in that case, it was around the time that they had to seal Leviathan, and now Leviathan is set free. It doesn't seem like that's important for his plan, though. What does seem important is that Bahamut is now kind of in his power, right, in his control. Um, this is not understood by anybody except Kuja at this stage, right? We get um, the perspective of Vivi kind of seeing the aftermath of the battle. Kuja's departed. Bronn is almost but not quite dead. And some of her last words, again, allude to plays, right? She mentions like feeling free for the first time since she saw a play with Garnet and her father. So I guess one of the last memories she had before being taken over by the mist, right? Presumably after the father died and she took control of the army and all that. Anyway, so that, you can kind of pair it up with the way that we've seen plays and things going on, the way that Zidane uses the line from the play about the friends going on their journey together, and his sort of point there is like, why am I following you? It's because I want to, right? And so again, this idea of desire, not an ugly desire now, but like a romantic and perhaps even something tied in with his desire to find his own origins, right? He's seeing her finally realize who she is. And little by little, I think it's dawning on him that he still needs to do that himself, right? Um, Vivi, of course, is pretty far along his path. And the others, if they're still alive, have sort of fulfilled their main purpose, right? Freya, Steiner, Beatrix all did what they were kind of put on this world of Gaia to do, which is to protect others, right? So anyway, so that's pretty much the end of the disc. We do see a brief scene of them back in Alexandria at a kind of funeral or service of some kind for the dead queen.
Roses
And
are sent instead of Aries is Aries is
yeah,
lilies.
it's, that's quite the juxtaposition. Yeah, yeah.
Uh, she liked beautiful things, which is sort of an interesting contrast with how she's described by Kuja. But yeah, so I wanted to pick up what you were saying there. Interesting that this is the beginning of Act Two, because of course it's the end of Disc Two and the beginning of Disc Three. So when we think of, so this is not a scaling up iteration of the series, but rather a recap. So we wouldn't expect it to have six discs necessarily, or five, but it will, I believe, match a Final Fantasy VIII in having four.
Yeah.
And so I guess the entire first disc was a prelude or something like
Hmm.
that.
Yeah.
Um, but I wanted to mention that I appreciate that you bring up that we think that we are grand enough to fight against Kuja here, because and we confront him.
Yeah.
But then he relegates us just to witnessing. We have to watch. And so this reminds me quite a bit of Sephiroth in terms of showing us the scale.
Mhm.
Even at the very end of the game, when the bodies of the party members are just suspended, it's like this is a joke. And, and Final Fantasy Union has a good recap of the fact that the only reason you ever got to fight him is that his consciousness was doing like three different major things all at once, fighting the live stream, trying to summon Meteor, and dealing with you.
Mhm.
And so, and he was doing a pretty good job. But right. But Kuja, so I think in contrast to Final Fantasy VIII, where pretty early on you realize that what you're doing has larger importance than what you thought it did.
Mm,
The moment like Cypher gets involved with the president of Galbadia, immediately the scale goes up. And we've been thinking that we were fighting at a high level, but this is like sort of like to me when we you get to Beast Castle in Kingdom Hearts and you lose the Keyblade to Riku
mm,
and you get a wooden stick. And you thought you were so far in the game just to see that you're not that far at all. And so Braun is the major antagonist and fighter against Kuja. She has these incredible weapons, much better than you. Even Leviathan. Garnet says that he Leviathan would be too powerful, but Bahamut is the king of dragons, is the last described as the last Eidolon of Gaia, and so the most powerful. And so we are scaled down in our evaluation of ourselves. We only fight stock enemies, in fact. And so this reminds me quite a bit of Sephiroth slash Genova, what it says at the end of Disc 1 of Final Fantasy when Aerith dies. You're just a puppet. And Kuja says something very similar that it's all going according to plan. And
yeah.
so we have to witness what happens according to his plan, his agency. We are reduced to functions of what he has already decided. And he is revealing that to us that all of what we thought was our choice in the first two discs of this game has been totally guided by the malevolent force of Kuja. Now, whether he's going to have a Zidane like realization himself and
Mm,
have to realize that somebody is pulling his strings and that he has some strings and a tail is perhaps something that is going to he's going to run up against. But I did want to mention that in the way that this is a recap, it's like Kuja has everything working with him, a cool working for him. He has a silver dragon, he has a cool outfit, he he fights against Braun, but he does not come off as intimidating and cool as Sephiroth.
no.
It is revealed to us that we are much weaker than he is, but it's uh not in the same way as Sephiroth just seems impossibly powerful. And I don't yeah, so I there's still something missing from
Mm,
Kuja in terms of his utter malevolence. There's something I don't know. His contempt for Queen Braun seems justified. Everybody, I think, has contempt for her. So perhaps he doesn't yet come off as or hasn't done anything that is truly evil. Maybe to
mm.
Garnet. And it does seem evil, him corrupting Braun, but I don't know. What do you think of that?
Yeah, no, I think his motives remain a little bit obscure. Um, it does seem like he was using uh, aspect of her that was already there and just sort of like brought it brought it more to the surface. Um, it is interesting that in this kind of denouement scene, um, Garnet, and throughout, she has always kind of remained hopeful that she could save her mother, as she still calls her, right? Um, and and again, we see this from Vivi's perspective, like um, he talks about how he hates Kuja, he hates Braun, but there's something different about that, right? Like the fact that she's defeated doesn't bring him any joy. He just feels bad. And
Garnet cry. That makes him feel strange.
yeah, so this isn't the first time that's come up either, right? Like with with Aiko and the loss of her jewel until she gets it back. Um, Zidane kind of tells her like, "Hey, if you feel sad, you should go ahead and cry." Right? And there's a lot of emphasis placed on that um like, you know, emotional outpouring, I guess. Um I don't know if there's, something about what you're saying with Kuja, something about this way in which he is always very theatrical and very sort of like a puppet master or director of the action. Um, Up until now, he hasn't been really involved with it as directly. Um, but maybe there is something that we as players like resist when we're being told to, feel a certain way or being relegated to the status of passive audience, essentially. Um, and there's something like kind of deep in the medium itself, right, that resists that. We don't want to just watch cutscenes, especially at this point in the development of the platform and stuff. Like more and more games start to lean on the use of cutscenes, and there's a whole discussion of like, are these even games at this point, or is this some kind of hybrid medium now? Especially the Metal Gear Solid series kind of comes in for some controversy around that. But yeah, so I'm not sure. Like, I think this game in particular is really interested in the theatrical as opposed to the cinematic. And I think the ways that a theater performance impacts its audience can be um, more positive and can be more, I guess, sort of harmonious. Like we both want the same thing and we both enter into that willingly. And it can be more mawkish, sentimental. It's um, heavy-handed, right? It can reach for certain effects, emotional effects that it's not really earning. And maybe what you're describing is like Kuja's in this slot where he sort of assumes the power of a Sephiroth type hero and yet isn't really delivering on that. He's actually um, awkwardly sort of between that sort of villain and something more like like an Emperor Gestalt in FF6. He never really the main uh, like he's not really a figure that you face head on. He's sort of manipulating things behind the scenes type of deal. But yeah, but this is something that we'll see uh, in a lot of the Final Fantasies, actually, maybe all of them. I want to say the ostensible villain is in some way a stand-in for some other power. And I don't know if there's like an infinite regress there at a certain point, right? Like each of those could also just be um, a stand-in for something else, or if there is a point at which that has to sort of stop somewhere, right? Like with the ultimate summon, right? I don't know if that's actually true. Like I don't remember, but I sort of doubt that Bahamut is actually the strongest force in this planet. Oh, I guess we'll find out.
Well, it's funny that you say this planet. Maybe if we extend that to this universe, because there's
Yeah.
planets. So it may be the case that summons are tied to particular planets, and that planets of differing strength can have summons of differing strength.
Well, yeah, and we even see the eyeball thing overpower Bahamut, like in that very moment. So clearly, it's not quite.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
I think we will see that the strongest summon in this game, which I don't think either of us will get in this playthrough, but you might.
Mm.
If either of us were to, it would be you. Comes from a place called Terra. Uh,
Ah.
And so, yeah, no, I broadly agree with that. I like your distinction between theatrical and cinematic, then, and that is also a distinction in style we've mentioned from before, where we get like sort of a folktale a look as opposed to a realist look. And to be theatrical is to be overdone, to stand out, whereas to be cinematic is to be subtler. But also in terms of cinematography. Cinema is very good for building suspense, and Sephiroth, we got to see evidence of his raw power. Now
Yeah.
we're seeing more and more of what Kuja can do, but it's been more manipulative in terms of turning people against those they love so
Mhm.
far, rather than like raw power. Now, this eye thing might have changed that a little bit. But the other element is we get to see the raw emotion of Sephiroth and how betrayed he feels and how strong his motivation becomes to punish people,
Mm.
and even an entire race genocidally, because he thinks is part of a race that was destroyed by them, the ancients, incorrectly. But so right, you mentioned that not only do we have a question mark about the abilities of Kuja, and they haven't been so as intimidatingly expressed in the medium so far, but also a question of motivation. He seems pretty happy with himself, not as unhinged as a Kefka, either, right? Kefka was dangerous because he was unhinged. He didn't know what his limit was. He just poisoned Cyan's whole people.
Yeah.
Like his scale was, you could tell he was messed up from the Magitech infusions.
Mm.
That did not mess Celeste up as much as him. And yeah, so but right, so Kuja, I think, like so many things with Final Fantasy IX, like a good tea, or maybe even a good wine, and takes time to open up. I think he will have a chance to respond to that as a character, as it were, and get to reveal powerful motivations and powerful power expressions of power.
Mhm.
Um, but it will be interesting to see because again, I think a limitation of the summary form and recapping is that it's hard to push it. Not only does one not push farther in certain ways in terms of style and maybe even characterization, but one doesn't push as far. And so Kuja, in being more theatrical, it's as if they're sort of just seeding the ground to all the Ultimatias and the Kefkas and the Sephiroths of before. That Kuja will be sort of a theatrical summation of them, but maybe not with the same essence exactly, or with the same characteristic force, I should say, the force of character. That's the other thing about Sephiroth. His force of will was strong enough to change the story, so that the story writers say that this alien that came there, that I think her role totally becomes very different when all of a sudden she is used by Sephiroth, whose will overpowers her and death in the life stream in order to then wreak vengeance on the world. Um,
Yeah.
After having ostensibly realized that he was totally wrong about his initial reevaluation as an ancient, and that actually what runs through his veins is this alien, but then he uses that alien force and its powers in order to continue that revenge.
Yeah.
There's something just totally special in the conception of that. And in a character that can that is conceived of doing that. And so Kuja has huge shoes to fill. Not to mention the fact that Kefka becomes a god and Ultimacia effectively stops the flow of time.
Mhm.
And um, so Kuja has revealed his real face. He thinks perhaps not in the tradition of Final Fantasies, like you said, where there's an ostensible villain, Idea, but it's actually Ultimacia.
Mm.
um or Sephiroth, but it's actually Genova, but it's actually Sephiroth and Genova, and then some, you know, this happens much earlier too, I think, with like X-Death, and Emperor Gestahl, these yeah, sort of embodiments of death. And I think we'll get layers of that in this
Yeah.
game. And that'll be sort of interesting too. Again, like you said about the theatricality, there are layer there are layers of revelation packed into the differing acts.
Mhm.
And so various masks will be added and then removed as we go through here. Hmm.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that as Kuja's plan has been unfolding so far, um, he has been using all of our party members sort of instrumentally, uh, but he hasn't directly, um, you know, confronted any of them. It's always been through other, um, sort of has these cat's paws and these, um, other characters uh, doing his work for him.
Red,
So
red,
exactly,
Braun at times. Right, right. He's pulling some strings.
but we haven't seen what he can actually do except in the form of this kind of cinematic sequence. And yeah, and one of the things that he has done, one of his creations, right, is the Black Mage army. And so what we, I guess, probably would have been looking for here is some kind of like acknowledgement that VV is different, or that the mages can do something different than what he expects. Because I don't think that was part of his plan. Um, Maybe, but probably not, right? And so again, there's this sense in which he's also said something about Zidane, and not directly done anything about it, right? Like that kid's going to be a problem, but he doesn't deal with the problem. So I don't really know. Um, the other kind of wrinkle there is that whenever we face enemies who have a lot of kind of confidence, that they're sort of over, maybe overconfident in their monologuing and their villainous declaration that their plans are going great, like it's usually not the case. And I think if you've played any of these kinds of games, then you're used to that sort of cliche. We saw this with Soul Cage in its kind of pre-battle speech, right? It's like, I know that I'm going to die, but not yet. But then it dies because you defeat it, right? So there is something a little bit, I don't know, like it's a little bit obvious that this is the kind of thing that a villain does right before they fail. Um, and I think the way that Vivi has broken free of the purposes that the mages were created for, um, that's also sort of sticking in my mind as maybe part of why Kuja is, uh, you know, this conflict with him is not as consequential feeling. Um, I think it's also, interesting to see how the third disc is going to open with a really like slowed down, a really calm sort of reset of the game, where we again are controlling Vivi, exploring a peaceful Alexandria, and in this case, um, it's not the birthday celebration and that play, but a coronation or something like that that's everyone's sort of building up to. Um, and so the pacing of this section of the game, it's like there's all this forward momentum, and then it just sort of
Dollop.
uh, yeah, it just kind of goes away. So it's like, um, and particularly Zidane, he's basically completely out of commission, right? He's just like
Lugubrious.
moping and depressed. Um,
Melancholia.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, so there's certain things about the construction of this character and this conflict that feel like they aren't quite coming together as effectively. So we
I,
shall see.
I like that, and I like as we move into this three, as we move from our first antagonist to our second antagonist, um, thinking about Kuja and Braun as perhaps forces that prevent Sakaguchi from making art. And so Braun is, of course, characterized by herself, by her breed,
Yes.
and
Ugly desire.
ugly desire, and her avarice is what the localizer I think was looking for. And because that covers both greed and like a deep desire. There are arguments about whether they're exactly the same. But Kuja can only create lifeless things. So there's an interesting thing about him. he'll find out that he has himself more limited than he thinks, but he can help create the black mages that he has this very low estimation of because they use the refuse of soul. And so we find out that the mist is somehow souls of creatures. So like Mako and the materia and its relationship to the life stream. We
Yeah.
find out that like this materia, Mako like stuff is being infused into these lifeless dummies. And so they're created by soul and black magic, but they don't have a natural soul.
Yeah.
And we expect Vivi to be treated differently. And of course he is different, but he's not. But there's something lacking. Kuja lacks the capacity to procreate or to have progeny.
Mhm.
And I think he thinks he's immortal. And we see that he's not invincible here. And that's also a key difference between Sephiroth and him. Sephiroth is presented as literally invincible, takes zero damage the first time. That's a huge difference between, by this from somebody who take has a little bit of blood. Now, obviously, Bahamut is represented as the strongest force we know of in this world so far,
Mhm.
and that makes him just bleed a little bit, and then he just takes it over. And so this is supposed to give us, I think, some sense of awe of him. But he says he can create things from the mist, but what he creates are things that are zombies. You use life or curative magic on them, and they just die
Yeah.
or cease to exist because they were never alive. And so the black mages in general, minus Vivi, who's special, and also the creatures he creates here, but also the war that he foments.
Mm.
He, like Achilles, as Agamemnon says, is most hateful to him because he's always stirring up conflict. Um, he seems only ever to be he to only be a negative force.
Yeah.
But all that goes to say is that what he creates is effectively a bunch of clones that are
Yes.
lifeless. So lifeless, artless clones and greed are the sort of things that are or concepts that are embodied by the first two antagonists. And so if this summation is a summation as a piece of art is also a summation of things art has to contend against, like
Mhm.
limited time, cyclical time, getting stuck in cyclical time, right? All these deadlines over and over and doing it over and over again for Final Fantasy VIII, but also greed and and settling for lifeless clones. It's almost like one can hear what Sakaguchi had to hear from the board as
That's funny.
this. We need to pump out more money and create more clones, which is the part of the model that the last couple CEOs have really leaned into, obviously.
Mhm.
Um, uh, further merchandising and using IPs up, kind which seems to be what the last couple CEOs of Disney have also done. Rather than wanting to make, more unique works. But
Interesting.
right. Well, my friend, I'm sorry that I iced you on this and that you were very kind to talk to me about my recent work, which is still to come out in the
Uh-huh.
next couple days here, but I'll put a link to it on that episode. But in the same way that I had played up to a certain part and then had to take a few weeks back or had to wait for the podcast to catch up with where I had played. That happened to you this time, and so
It's
you had
okay.
experience of not having it, perhaps having already started compartmentalizing the memories, but not in the exact order that you played through them because it wasn't just that fresh for you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's okay. I think what will help is getting into this next disc and
Yes.
starting to see the bigger picture. Because yeah, seeing just disc two in its, you know, integrity, seeing how it fits in with disc one is fine and all, but it is kind of hard to keep straight what's going on without having the whole picture in mind. Um, So yeah, so we come, full circle to see what was going on with that vision um, of Garnet's at the very start of the game. And this time, she is ascending the throne, um, flanked by Beatrix and Steiner with Tot there as well, and seemingly out of reach of Zidane, who is really down in the dumps about this. Um, so in some sense, he's having to confront his image of himself as this great swashbuckling ladies' man, um, seeing this person who he's legitimately cares about now and has had this whole adventure with, um, apparently out of reach, apparently just you know
which is
leaving him in the lurch. So
really interesting because it is possible that she could do that as she's now returned and to her role, and that it's doubly interesting that the princess has now returned and also the wise figure Dr. Tot, who were both banished. But Zidane finds himself in the same situation that he started in some ways. And so disc three is like disc one, like you mentioned, starting with a play, but also like Zidane had no chance with her when she was princess to begin with.
yeah,
He has perhaps been deluding himself this entire time. Like
yes,
we've been deluding ourselves about our world importance. She is important, perhaps not Zidane. And so perhaps his ego is being hit on two fronts, as it were. I just wanted to mention that perhaps hopefully the eye in the sky is foreshadowing our relationship to the game, and that the clouds part and our eye is opened and we can see what's going on.
uh,
Hope perhaps even affecting the action in some way or another, as it were, in relation to Kuja. That'd be quite nice to invert that relationship. And well, I think that's the ultimate goal in the RPGs, right? To go from passive sort of
mm,
recipient to active maker in the plot and action of the destiny of your character. And but hopefully that's also tethered to the destiny of the world.
mhm. Yeah,
Uh,
we shall see.
Yeah, we'll see. I guess across multiple platforms. Well, happy New Year, my friend, and happy first New Year to your new son and to all your
Thank
other
you.
sons too, of whom you now have three, Charles, William, and Daniel. And so it is, and also, of course, to your wife and to your wonderful parents. And
Thanks.
it has been another good year talking with you and looking forward to working on this and more projects in the new year.
Definitely should be a good one. Thanks again.